The sound of her hand against my face was louder than the string quartet. 200 guests heard it. I felt my cheek burn before I understood what had happened, before the officiant lowered his book. My mother stood in the center aisle in her pale blue dress, chest rising and falling, staring at the ivory lace I was wearing like it had betrayed her. "No daughter of mine wears that," she said, loud enough that the back row heard it over the harpist. Somewhere a chair scraped against marble. Nobody in that room moved. My new husband's hand tightened around mine. Somewhere behind me, my grandmother's dress held its shape, unbothered, as if it had survived worse than this. Welcome back to Calm Justice Stories, where ordinary people face impossible family moments and come out the other side with their dignity intact. If you've ever been shamed publicly for something you never did wrong, stay with me, because what happened days later in that courtroom changed absolutely everything. Drop a comment if you've ever been humiliated by someone who claimed to love you, and subscribe before we continue. My name is Claire. I'm 29, and I run quality assurance for a medical device company, the kind of job where a single missed decimal point can cost someone their life, so I learned early to check everything twice and say nothing until I was certain. That habit followed me everywhere. I don't raise my voice in meetings. I don't guess when I can verify. My coworkers joke that I could defuse a bomb with a spreadsheet. I mention this because it matters for what happened later, in a courtroom, when everyone expected me to fall apart, and I didn't. My grandmother raised me through the years. My parents' marriage was falling apart in slow motion. Arguments behind closed doors, silences that lasted for days. She taught me to iron a collar properly, to balance a checkbook, to sit quietly through a storm instead of running from it. When she passed 2 years ago, she left me her wedding dress, hand-sewn in 1968, the lace yellowed at the hem but still perfect. I told my mother I planned to wear it down the aisle. She went pale, then changed the subject so fast I almost missed it. I noted it and moved on. I didn't know yet that I should have asked why. My mother has always been particular about what people saw. When I was 14, she pulled me out of a school photo lineup because my hair wasn't styled the way she wanted and rescheduled the whole session around her preference, telling the photographer it was a mix-up with the calendar. I remember standing in that hallway while she smiled at him and lied without blinking. I didn't think much of it then. Mothers fuss over photos. That's normal, I told myself. By 20, it wasn't photos anymore. I got into a state university 2 hours from home, the program I wanted, the one I'd worked towards since junior year. My mother told relatives I'd chosen it because it was closer to a boyfriend who didn't exist. When I corrected her at a family dinner, she laughed it off in front of everyone and told me not to be so sensitive about a little joke. I let it go because arguing with her in public never ended in my favor. It only ended in me apologizing for embarrassing her. The clearest one came 6 years ago. My grandmother's jewelry box went missing during a visit to my parents' house, and my mother filed a police report within a day, telling everyone it had been stolen, describing pieces down to the clasp. She cried about it at Thanksgiving that year, called it devastating, called herself a victim. My grandmother never said a word against her, though I remember the look on her face when the subject came up, tired and careful, like she'd learned there was no version of the truth worth fighting for. The case went nowhere. Nobody was ever charged. My mother stopped mentioning it after a while, the way she stopped mentioning most things once they'd served their purpose. I didn't connect any of it at the time. Each incident felt separate, explainable, forgivable on its own. It was only later, sitting across from a courtroom exhibit, that I understood I'd been watching the same pattern my whole life. My mother didn't lie because she panicked. She lied because it worked every single time, and no one around her ever checked. The morning of the wedding, my mother came to the bridal suite to help with my hair, the way we'd planned for months. I was already dressed when she walked in, the ivory lace catching the light from the window, and I watched her face change before she said a single word. It wasn't disapproval. Disapproval I would have recognized. This was something closer to panic, quick and involuntary, gone almost as fast as it appeared, replaced by a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That old thing," she said, reaching out to touch the sleeve like she was checking it was real. "I didn't realize you were actually going through with wearing it." I told her I'd mentioned it a dozen times, that it was Grandma's, that it mattered to me. She nodded too quickly, said something about needing air, and left the room before the makeup artist had even finished my other side. I remember thinking she seemed nervous, not angry, and telling myself it was just a mother's emotions on her daughter's wedding day. I had no idea I was watching the first crack in something that had been sealed shut for 6 years. My maid of honor, Priya, found me 20 minutes before the ceremony, her face tight in a way I didn't like. "Your mom just cornered the wedding coordinator," she said. "I heard her say get that dress off her before she walks down, whatever it takes." I laughed it off, assumed it was some leftover opinion about the neckline or the lace being dated. Priya didn't laugh with me. "Claire," she looked scared, not annoyed. I told her I wasn't going to let my mother hijack one more day of my life with her opinions, that I'd made peace with ignoring her a long time ago. I set one rule for myself walking into that ceremony. Nothing she says today gets to land. I believed I could hold that line. I had no idea how literally she was about to test it. The processional began the way we'd rehearsed it. String quartet easing into the opening chords, my father walking me forward one measured step at a time. I could see my mother in the second row, hands folded too tightly in her lap, watching not my face but the dress, the way you watch something you're waiting to catch fire. I told myself it was nothing. I'd made my rule. Nothing she did today would land. The ceremony moved the way ceremonies do, soft and unhurried, guests dabbing their eyes at the right moments. My husband's hands were steady around mine, and for a few minutes I actually forgot she was there. The officiant opened his book. He read the first line about two people choosing each other, and I watched my mother's shoulders rise like she was bracing for something. She stood up before he reached the second line. At first I thought she was overcome, the way mothers sometimes are, reaching for a tissue, needing air. But she didn't stay in the aisle behind the rows. She walked forward, past my aunt, past the flower girl frozen mid-step, straight toward the altar, and every head in that room turned to follow her instead of me. "Mom," I said quietly, the way you'd correct a child, not yet understanding what was coming. She didn't answer me in words. Her hand moved fast, faster than I could track, and the sound of it against my cheek cracked through the room louder than the quartet had ever played. I felt heat bloom across my face before my brain caught up to what had happened. Somewhere behind me, a guest gasped audibly enough that it echoed off the stone. "No daughter of mine wears that," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of that hall, clear and deliberate. Not the voice of someone out of control, but someone who had decided this moment mattered more than anything else happening around her. I stood there with my hand rising slowly to my cheek, more stunned than hurt, watching 200 people watch me instead of helping me. My husband stepped forward first, placing himself half between us, his jaw tight in a way I'd never seen. The officiant closed his book without being asked. Somewhere near the back, someone's phone was already lifted, recording, though I didn't notice that detail until much later, when it would matter more than anyone in that room could have guessed. I didn't cry. I didn't shout back. I stood very still in my grandmother's lace, watching my mother's chest rise and fall like she'd just run somewhere urgent, and I understood, even before I understood why, that this had never been about the dress at all. 3 days later, I sat in a lawyer's office instead of on a honeymoon. The video from the ceremony had already been shared 400 times online by then, someone's phone catching every second, my mother's hand connecting, her sentence carrying clean over the quartet. My attorney, a calm woman named Renata, told me assault charges weren't about revenge, they were about documentation, about making sure this didn't get quietly rewritten into a family disagreement the way everything else always had. Renata asked one question that changed the direction of everything. "You mentioned a jewelry theft years ago. Was there ever a settlement?" I didn't know. I'd never asked. She pulled the old police report and the insurance claim my mother had filed, cross-referencing dates out of habit more than suspicion. That's when she found it, an itemized list of the missing jewelry, submitted for reimbursement, including a description of stones that had, according to my grandmother's own handwritten estate notes from years earlier, already been given to me. Sewn, according to a small notation in the margin, into the hem of a wedding dress for safekeeping. I sat very still reading that page twice. The dress I'd worn down the aisle wasn't just my grandmother's dress. It was evidence my mother had spent 6 years collecting an insurance payout for jewelry that had never actually been stolen at all. My mother showed up at my apartment the night before the hearing, uninvited, still wearing the same tight, urgent expression she'd had in the bridal suite. Priya was there when she arrived, and my mother didn't ask her to leave, which told me later just how rattled she really was. "You're going to destroy this family over a dress," she said, standing in my doorway like she had every right to be there. Not an apology, not a question about my face, still faintly bruised along the cheekbone. Just that sentence, delivered like an accusation aimed at me instead of an admission aimed at herself. I asked her calmly why a dress mattered enough to slap me in front of 200 people. She didn't answer that. She said the case would humiliate everyone, that I was being selfish, that family doesn't do this to family. Priya stood quietly by the kitchen counter, watching my mother beg without once saying sorry, and I realized she wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of what the courtroom might find, and I didn't raise my voice. I didn't remind her of the slap, or the video, or the 200 people who'd watched her decide a dress mattered more than my wedding day. I stood in my own doorway, in the apartment I'd paid for myself since I was 23, and I let the silence sit there long enough that she started talking again just to fill it. "Claire, please, think about what this does to us." "I am thinking about it," I said. "That's the problem." She reached for my arm the way she used to when I was small, and about to say something she didn't want said in public. I stepped back, just enough that her hand closed on air instead. "I'm not dropping the charges," I told her. "Why not?" "Because you didn't ask me that when you slapped me in front of my own wedding. You didn't ask anything. You just decided." I kept my voice level, the same voice I use when a batch fails inspection and someone wants me to sign off anyway. "I'm not deciding anything tonight. I'm letting the process decide." She stood there a moment longer, waiting for me to fold the way I always had. When I didn't, she turned and left without another word, and I closed the door quietly behind her. The way you close a door on something you already know isn't coming back the same. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled, half-empty except for Priya, my husband, and a court reporter typing without looking at her keys. My mother sat across the aisle in a gray suit I didn't recognize, her lawyer leaning close to whisper something she barely seemed to hear. The prosecutor walked her through the wedding first, calm. Procedural questions she answered in short, clipped sentences. Then Renata stood for cross-examination and asked about the insurance claim from 6 years earlier, the missing jewelry, the itemized list submitted for reimbursement. My mother's hands tightened in her lap. "I don't see how that's relevant," she said. "Humor me," Renata said. "Where were the pieces on this list when you filed the claim?" "They were stolen. I already told the police that." "And yet," Renata said, sliding a photocopy across the table, "your own mother's estate notes describe these same pieces being sewn into the hem of a dress for safekeeping 2 years before you filed this claim. Can you explain that?" The silence stretched long enough that the judge asked if she needed a moment. My mother didn't take one. She started talking instead, fast, unraveling in real time, the way people do when the story they've told for years finally runs out of road. "I needed the money. Your father and I were behind on the house. And I thought no one would ever look that closely. And then you said you wanted to wear it, and I panicked. I couldn't let anyone see it. I couldn't let it come out." She stopped herself too late. The words were already on the record, already in the reporter's steady typing, already true in a way nothing she said afterward could undo. I watched her face crumple into something I'd never seen on her before. Not anger, not control, just a woman finally caught inside her own lie. Aftermath. The fraud investigation opened within a week, built almost entirely on her own words from that courtroom. The insurance company pursued repayment. The assault charge moved forward separately, resulting in probation and a mandated program neither of us ever discussed afterward. My father moved out 3 months later, quietly, the way he'd done most things in that marriage. I didn't call my mother again after the hearing, and she didn't call me. Priya told me once that people in town still whispered about it at the grocery store, though I stopped listening for it after a while. My husband and I had the dress cleaned properly, the lining resewn where the jewelry had once been hidden, and I hung it in a garment bag in our closet instead of storing it away. Some nights, I still think about my grandmother. How carefully she must have chosen her silence all those years, protecting me from a truth she couldn't prove yet. I understand that silence differently now. It wasn't weakness. It was patience, waiting for the moment the truth could finally hold its own weight. I learned that the people most afraid of the truth are usually the ones shouting loudest about loyalty. My mother didn't slap me because of a dress. She slapped me because the truth was already walking down that aisle, and she knew it. If someone has ever tried to silence you to protect themselves, tell me in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about quiet dignity outlasting loud lies.